Hey everyone. Before this video starts, I just wanna apologize. To make this short, I thought that it was UshiTen who won the vote and wrote UshiTen instead of 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙨. I'll make it up to you guys as soon as I can. But for now, UshiTen fans have unexpectedly won, so please do enjoy. I enjoyed writing this, so I hope you enjoyed reading it as well. Special thanks to these wonderful people for commenting on my posts and being super supportive and sticking until the end regardless of my almost year-long hiatus. I hope you guys know how much I love you and your support. It inspired me to write and post. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. Thank you so much for 17k, my beauties. What is love, exactly? What's so special about loving someone who reciprocates your love for them? What's so special about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Are those just titles to prove that you only have eyes for them and no one else? He couldn't quite understand what the fuss was all about. As Ushijima walks in an unfamiliar alley, he spots a boy next to a rusted ladder, crouching on the ground with both of his palms covering his face. His physical features were a blur in his vision, but his surroundings looked normal. He then hears him whimper, wiping away the sides of his eyes as he chokes up a sob and gasps for air. The figure then looks up from the ground at him, clutching his shirt as if to stop his ragged breathing. His voice broke as he questioned the bewildered boy looking down at him. Do you think I'm pretty? Although Ushijima has not yet seen his face, he somehow already knows his answer. As he was about to open his mouth to reply, he felt a vibration and someone singing, off key, to be precise, Cake by the Ocean by 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙨. He knew that voice well enough to be the only person who would sing that way. He opens his eyes to find out that Tendou is calling him through FaceTime. He checks the time and realizes that it is 5:40 in the morning. Why was Tendou calling him this early? He picks up the call and places the phone on his chest, the camera facing towards his chin, not realizing that Tendou's view is just his sharp jawline. Good morning, Ushi. Ushijima yawns, rubbing his eyes, when his screen automatically turns its brightness up. He wonders how to turn the brightness down. Are you okay? Why is my phone so bright? Turn the brightness down, Toshi. Tendou laughed, seeing Ushijima squinting his eyes, which were looking at the screen intently, his eyes inspecting each part of the screen. I can't find the, oh, never mind. How does it feel to finally have an iOS gadget? I'm not quite used to iOS since I've been using my keypad for quite some time now. Thank you again, Tendou. You didn't have to. Tendou stretched, then moved the camera back closer to him. Anything for you, Wakatoshi-kun. Think of it as an early or late birthday gift from me. And also an apology gift for missing your birthday last year, too. Ushijima gave him a small smile, and Tendou returned it with a wide grin. Tendou hums. Why did you call at? He checks the time on his phone. At 5 in the morning? And when and how did you change the ringtone to you singing Cake by the Ocean? Tendou grins, pacing around his room. Tendou signaled to give him a minute, grabbing a brush to comb his red hair. I have my ways on that one. I just can't go back to sleep. For once, Ushijima saw Tendou's hair down. He didn't see or know what Tendou would look like with his hair down, and somehow, his new look made his heart skip a beat by just staring at how different Tendou looks. Not in a bad way, to be precise. He doesn't know why his heart skipped a beat, which left him baffled at why he felt something weird in his chest. Clutching his chest, he silently gulps, somehow hoping that by swallowing the lump on his throat, it'll disappear. The loud thumping in his ears or his heart repeatedly beating faster each second. Tendou, still brushing his hair, gave him a grimace-like smile, pushing the camera back to let it position itself so that Ushijima could see Tendou brushing his red locks. Sorry about that, Wakatoshi-kun. I'm pretty sure you're weirded out by how different I look with my hair down. Usually, I don't want others to see me with my hair down. I might scare them away again. Haha. Ushijima turned his head to the side. He didn't think Tendou looked weird. Oh no, not at all. To him, he looks. Tendou? Yeah? I don't think you look weird, I think. Ushijima doesn't know whether it was the right word to describe how he feels about it, seeing Tendou's hair down. Although he knows for sure that he does not look weird, he never looks weird to him. He knows what he thinks, but he doesn't exactly know the right word or words to describe how he looks right now. Tendou flops down on his bed and turns to his side, wiping the camera with his thumb. He tossed his comb behind him and sighed. Ushijima shakes his head. Don't sweat it, Wakatoshi. I get it, I really do. If you say so, Tendou. Tendou gave him a weak smile in return. I woke up a couple of minutes ago, too, so I completely understand where you're coming from. No, it's nothing like that of the sort. But, just know that you don't look weird with your hair down. Tendou retained the smile he had on and fumbled with the tips of his hair, twirling it around while staring at it. Thank you, Wakatoshi. Don't thank me for stating the obvious. You look good with your hair down, Satori. Tendou's eyes widened briefly, and his cheeks had a tinge of red. He was about to reply until he dropped his phone on the ground, hearing Tendou mutter a bunch of profanities under his breath. There was a bit of shuffling, with Ushijima pondering the black screen. Then Tendou's face popped up, his cheeks an even darker shade of red. He cleared his throat. Oh, sorry about that, Wakatoshi. I dropped my phone for a second. Haha. Is everything alright over there, Satori? Are you alright? Oh me. Yeah, of course. Everything's just peachy. There was shuffling, then a pause. Nothing could be heard except a faint click of the tongue. God, don't say it like that so easily. Tendou mutters under his breath, leaving Ushijima wondering what he meant by that. What do you mean by that? Tendou jumped, not expecting it to be heard by Ushijima, who was looking at him with curiosity. He scratched the nape of his neck and chuckled nervously as he waved his hand dismissively. Again, don't worry about it. Random words just spew out of my mouth without me knowing. Don't mind. You know, if you don't want me to call you Satori, please do inform me. I too stop. The only reason I used your first name was to let you know that I was serious about what I said previously. Tendou's mouth formed into a small O as he explained, his rigged frame slowly slouching comfortably on his headrest. I wasn't joking when I said that you look good with your hair down. Regardless, you do look better with either hairstyle. Tendou shot up to sit stiffly against his headrest, his body becoming as rigid as it was before. His face was more flushed than usual, too. He mutters under his breath as he turns his camera off, with Ushijima not quite hearing him correctly. You're making this more difficult for me, Ushiwaka. Ushijima didn't bother to ask what he just said, choosing to ignore it as his concern at that moment was whether Tendou didn't like the fact that he wanted to be called by his first name or not. I don't quite understand you, Tendou. Don't worry about it anymore, Wakatoshi. I will be turning my camera off for a hot minute. He nods silently, looking at Tendou's FaceTime profile picture, which showed the both of them eating chocolate ice cream, which was Tendou's request that both of them take a picture of eating at one of the local ice cream parlors nearby. It was back when they were first years, and it was the first time he'd ever met such a unique individual in his whole life. The corners of Tendou's eyes wrinkled slightly as he had his arms wrapped around Ushijima, who was looking at his melting chocolate ice cream in a daze. He remembers that specific memory all too well. Don't miss me too much. How is that possible when we're on a call right now? Oh, so you do miss me, huh? Was 2 weeks away from each other that hard? Ushi? No, not really. You've called me every day since the day you went back to your place. The least you could have said was that you missed me to make me feel good. Sorry. Ushijima just watched his contact photo in silence as he listened to the all too familiar creaking of a door, followed by a faucet being turned on. The sounds of water gushing out and Tendou's humming were also like his everyday routine, as every time they call in the morning, that's what he's usually heard for the past 2 weeks. Don't be shocked and all, but I showed extra early this morning. Tendou, who sounds like he was brushing his teeth, let out a huff. It must be because I'm really excited to see you and the team again. It feels like years. I wonder if Tsutomu has grown a bit taller. Or if Shirabu has grown. Ugh. I hope the coach doesn't let us do diving drills. It'll kill the mood. I don't think that's possible. A faucet being turned off could be heard as well as loud shuffling. Ushijima was about to place his phone back on his bed until Tendou turned his video camera on and put a gel and cone on both of his hands. Ushijima was left a bit breathless. Anyway, I'll meet you at the dorm. Yeah? My bags are all packed too. All that's left is for me to actually get outside of this house and go over. Tendou gently brushes his slightly damp hair and dries it with a towel that is draped across his neck. Ushijima couldn't help but stare at him. Seeing him like this for the first time took him aback. Just a little bit. I'll wait for you until you're out since my place from the school is quite near, so we can meet outside. Does that sound good? Ushijima nods, not really understanding what he feels. Moreover, why is he feeling that way, especially toward Tendou? Or is it just that he's surprised? Yeah, that's alright with me. I'll meet you outside. Yay. I'll see you in a bit, Wakatoshi. See you, Tendou. Tendou animatedly waves goodbye at the camera, while Ushijima gives him a tight-lipped smile in return. He ends the call, leaving Ushijima staring at his phone blankly. He wonders what that feeling could be. With that, he got up and got ready, the image of Tendou with his hair down not leaving his mind. He felt that strange tug in his chest once more. With that, he knows there could only be one person in mind who could help him understand that strange feeling. Asking the person, however, is not exactly a walk in the park. Wakatoshi-kun. Over here, over here. Can you see me? You're right in front of me, Tendou. Just making sure. Right. Tendou lightly punches his chest and chuckles, his eyes shining as he gawks at Ushijima with evident excitement. Ah. You've grown, haven't you? It feels like you're growing every day. That's totally not fair. I don't think I have grown taller. For me, it looked like you did. I grew a centimeter taller. A centimeter didn't exactly change your appearance, Tendou. Way to be a heartbreaker there, Wakatoshi. Ushijima chuckles at him, a small smile on his face, as Tendou stares in awe at the sight in front of him. Well, then, that's good to know, Tendou. I'm proud of you. Hey. Now you're just making fun of me. His voice cracked a little, making Ushijima chuckle once more, covering his mouth with his fist. Tendou blushes and hits his chest again, but not as lightly as before. Wakatoshi? Smiling? That's a sight you don't see every day. I do smile. Yeah, but people will mistake it as if you're plotting a crime against someone. Like that number 9 from that first year in Karasuno. But I'm not, though. Yeah, we know. The whole team. I mean, do I genuinely look like I'm about to commit arson? Honestly? Yeah. Ushijima frowns, then forces a toothy grin. How about that? I think we should practice smiling more than volleyball. They both stayed silent for a moment, then Tendou laughed, making Ushijima silently chuckle. But in all honesty, it isn't so bad when there are genuine moments like this. I'm saddened that I look like that when I do during matches, but I'm happy to know you said that, too. Tendou grins. He then pushed him from behind and inside their dormitory, with Ushijima picking up their duffel bags. Tendou was whistling while he stayed silent as he let Tendou push him inside their dormitory. Unpacking their things didn't take as long as they expected. Their dorm room, however, would take a bit longer to clean, as Ushijima pointed out that the place is a bit unruly and unorganized while also mentioning the finest dust particles he'd seen under the bed and on their desks. This was much to Tendou's protests that the place looked like it had been recently cleaned. He wasn't wrong, though. They did clean up before they left for spring break. As the two chattered, Ushijima sweeping the floor and Tendou almost done unpacking his things on the desk, they were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. The two boys glanced at each other, wondering who it could be. No one's home. There was a pause of silence. I call bullshit. Open the door or I'm breaking it down. It was Semi. We're a bit feisty now, aren't we? Semi. That isn't very kind of you to do so. Open up. What's the magic word? You have 5 seconds. That's more than one word, Semi. 5, 4, 3. Yikes, I'm coming, geez. Ushijima watched as Tendou smirked as he strutted towards the door, dragging his legs lazily. Tendou peeps through the tiny peephole, then slightly opens the door. All of a sudden the door burst open, hitting Tendou harshly on his face as Semi gave Ushijima a winning grin as he waved a hand at him enthusiastically. Shirabu, from behind him, had a small smile on his face as he was holding 2 plastic bags on his left hand while his right was intertwined with Semi's. Wakatoshi. We brought you hayashi rice and other stuff. I don't know what Shirabu bought, but there's more than enough for us. Shirabu sighs. The other third years wanted to come along, but they couldn't make it in time. They'll be there later this afternoon for practice, though. Shirabu lets go of Semi's hand and bows politely. He then placed the plastic bags on their shared desk and sat on the wooden chair on which Tendou had previously sat and sat backwards, resting his chin on top of his hands as he looked at their dorm. Well? Shirabu looks up at Tendou, who is cradling his nose, his face red as he tenderly massages the sides of his nose, his voice nasal as he pinches his nose as he whines. Well, what? What about me? Didn't you get anything for me? No, we didn't. Sorry, Tendou-san. There was a brief tinge of sadness on Tendou's face that Shirabu and Semi didn't notice, but Ushijima clearly saw. He then cleared his throat and crossed his arms, looking away with a scoff. Fine, be like that. See if I care. Shirabu playfully rolled his eyes and fished a paper bag inside the plastic, then shoved it on Tendou's chest, a small blush on his face as he looked away shyly. Tendou's eyes shone in delight as he saw the cloud of cold mist that wasn't as perceivable to the eye with a quick glance. His face turned an even darker shade of red as Tendou gave him an even brighter grin, jumping up and down in delight with the paper bag that was about to rip. Semi chuckles, places a hand on Shirabu's head, and gives Tendou a thumbs up. Of course we'd get you chocolate ice cream for dessert, Tendou. It was all Kinjiro's idea, right? He kisses Shirabu on the top of his head, who clicks his tongue and turns to face the desk that had their food for lunch a few hours later. I mean, the coach doesn't want us to eat ice cream before practice, but I just thought that today could be just a little secret for everyone on the team who knows we're not eating healthy, you know? A little dessert after lunch. Today can be an exception, just this once. Kenjiro, I think you made your senpai cry. Hey. Or, come here and give me a hug. Hey. Watch it. Back off. Get off of me. Ushijima watches in silence as Tendou hugs a visibly uncomfortable Shirabu, who was forcefully trying to pry his arms that were embraced tightly around his chest. Semi was then whistling and preparing their food and placing the ice cream in their mini refrigerator as if Shirabu wasn't screaming at a crying Tendou, who was almost choking him to death. Interesting. Tendou really has an effect on other people, especially the younger members of their team, without knowing how the first and second years look up to him. This observation had Ushijima smiling to himself, unknowingly, too. His phone then vibrated a couple of times inside the pockets of his sweatpants, ignoring the ruckus from the two. He fished his phone out and checked his messages.
Hey. I'll be there by 5. You better come in time. I literally don't have all day.
He didn't respond. Instead, he immediately snatched his jacket, which was neatly folded on his bed, and draped it over his back. He walked over to his shoes near the door and slipped them in, ready to go out. Semi, noticing Ushijima's suddenness to go out, called out to him, making the two boys' chatter come to a sudden halt and silently look at both Semi and Ushijima. Oh, where are you going? Aren't you going to have lunch with us first, Wakatoshi? Tendou gave him an indescribable look that he couldn't exactly pinpoint. Something was telling him to stay with them, but the opportunity is once in a blue moon, or only a one-time thing. He can't pass it up, no matter what the feeling in his chest is wanting him to do instead of the meetup. Please don't wait for me, I might not be able to make it back in time for lunch. If I have not yet arrived here in time for lunch, please eat ahead. I do not mind at all. Hey, now, where are you going? He pauses, not sure what gray lie he could come up with. In other words, find a believable excuse and make it sound believable. He was about to reply until his phone chimed 3 consecutive times, and then a vibration could be heard. He was a bit vexed at their impatience, but ignored it, stood up from tying the last lace on his shoe, and twisted the door open. I sincerely apologize. I'll be back as soon as I can. Shirabu bowed politely, and Semi crossed his arms and locked eyes with Shirabu, who was a bit bewildered. Tendou stayed silent, but waved goodbye as Ushijima nodded at him, barely sparing a glance towards the other two. As he closed the door behind him as he got out, he felt cold. He doesn't understand that feeling at all, and he wants to figure it out as soon as possible. He's his only saving grace. I'm sorry I'm 1 minute and 56 seconds late from our scheduled meeting time. I got lost on the way here. Geez, stop being so formal like you're my boss and we're having a business meeting. He shudders at the thought of Ushijima being his boss, a grimace evident on his face. Aikawa, who was sitting in front of him, took a quick sip of his chocolate shake and shuddered once more. Shit. Brain freeze. You shouldn't have drunk it all at once. You're not the boss of me. Of course I'm not. So don't tell me what to do. I'm just trying to help you. That's very helpful of you, Ushijima. Thank you. I was being sarcastic. Aikawa twisted his fork around the carbonara that he ordered and stuffed it inside his mouth, the contents splattering all over his mouth as he took another biteful. Don't you think you're eating a bit too much all at once? I literally only had water for breakfast and, also only had a cookie for dinner last night. That's not very healthy for an athlete like you. Yeah, no shit. Ushijima stares at Aikawa, who has almost finished eating his pasta, wondering how a guy like him is so different from the player he sees while in court. Stop staring. That's weird. I'm not staring. Yes you were. I was not. You were totally harassing me with your eyes. I really was not. Aikawa. I know I'm hot and all but you're literally trying to undress me right now with your eyes. I give up. Aikawa snorts. He then swallows the last of his pasta in his mouth and drinking every last bit of his shake, burped loudly enough that the table near them glanced at him for a second. Ushijima grimaced. Do you really not care that you're eating like a caveman in front of me? Why should I care? I don't exactly like you anyway. Ushijima tilts his head. But if it was someone you liked, would you still eat like that? Aikawa hums. It depends on what type of like we're talking about. If it's like, I like you as a friend, you're a good friend, so I'll at least look presentable eating in front of you. But if it's like, I like you as a friend, and you're my best friend, I'll eat like I haven't eaten in centuries. Ushijima, not quite understanding him, nodded slowly. But if it's I like you as someone I want to potentially date, then I'll look presentable. Ushijima scratched his ear in confusion. But shouldn't you eat properly regardless of who that could be? Isn't that supposed to be a general sign of respect for the person or people you're eating with? Aikawa sighs. Of course that's what you're supposed to do, Ushijima. It's more like trying to impress them. So why are you eating like that in front of me when you don't consider me your friend? That's because I don't particularly like you. Duh. Okay. Ushijima clears his throat, feeling a bit awkward. He never planned on meeting with Aikawa in a Western cafe, and asking for advice from him in his whole life, but he's willing to do anything to get his questions answered. Though there are more than just a couple of questions he doesn't know the answers to, he has very little time. So, if it were Iwaizumi, would you try to impress him? Aikawa pauses for a brief moment. Before Iwa-chan and I became a thing and came out, I always ate messily and didn't care about how I looked when I was with him. He stirs his bendable straw inside the empty glass and stares at it intently. But then we went on our first official date, and even though we were only eating street foods at that time, I ate properly and slowly chewed on my food. To him, it's unnatural of me to eat like that, but I couldn't help but feel shy and try my best to impress him, even though he knows I don't eat like that. Ushijima was more confused. My sincerest apologies, but I don't understand. Aikawa scratched his head and sighed in exasperation. What I meant was, if you like someone, you'd want to impress them. If you like a basketball player, for instance, but have zero knowledge of basketball, of course you'd want to learn and try to shoot a hoop and look cool to make them go, wow, you're amazing or something. Ah, I understand what you mean. Aikawa looks at him, scratches the back of his neck, and chuckles nervously. This is so weird, giving weird advice like this to my rival. I'm terrible at giving advice and explanations, but I'm feeling nice today, so I'm helping you out for only once in this lifetime. Aikawa smirks. I mean, you did say you were paying for my lunch as payment, right? Yes. A win-win. Ushijima nods slowly, making Ikoa smirk maliciously. Anything else? There is one thing. What? What is? Love? Ikoa looked at him like he spoke a different language. Why are you asking me that? Didn't you say that you have answers to all of my questions? What I meant to say was, why are you asking me what love is? Do you genuinely not know what love is? Have you never been loved before? That's just sad. Sucks to suck. My apologies. I worded it a bit too vaguely. It's nothing of the sort. Ushijima fidgets in his seat, something you don't see a guy like him do often. Ikoa eagerly leaned on the table, propped both his elbows on the table, and placed his chin on top of his palm. I always wondered what love was. What's so special about it? What is it that makes it so special about loving someone who reciprocates your love for them? What's so special about having a significant other? Are those just titles to prove that you only have eyes for them, and no one else? That you feel a certain way towards them, inclusively? He pauses for a moment, then looks at Ikoa's curious gaze. How does that feel? What are the indicators? Ikoa chuckles. He checks the time on his watch and runs his fingers through his hair. Well, we're kind of running out of time here, Ushiwaka. Our first period this afternoon will start in a couple of minutes, so I don't have enough time. He stands up from his seat, pats the imaginary dust on his pants, and fixes his uniform. I can't give you an answer that you need to hear directly, but I know you're smart enough to know what I'm talking about. He could have sworn he heard Ikoa curse at the fact that he told Ushijima he was smart and how he was degrading himself and his pride. If you feel a certain thump on your chest that doesn't sound like that with other people, then that's your other indicator. Other? Self-reflect. Observe how you will feel in a certain situation with them, and with other people who aren't them. You'll know what I mean when it happens. Ikoa clicked his tongue. I'll write it down in case you need a more specific explanation. Read this on your way back. I definitely deserved that meal with the efforts I'm exerting right now. I could go for milk bread but we're running out of time. He quickly grabs a piece of tissue paper from its dispenser, grabs his pen that was tucked inside his upper pocket, and quickly jots down a couple of bullet points. After he was done, he slid the tissue in front of him on the table and twirled his pen as he let out a low whistle. You have a brain and a heart. Use them to your advantage. Ikoa turns his back at him, ready to go, as he slings his bag on his shoulder. He was about to leave him looking at the kanjis that were neatly written on the tissue. Say hi to Ten-chan for me, yeah? Ushijima's eyes widened briefly. What? You think I wouldn't do a little digging? Ikoa scowls. He pisses me off with that annoying block of his, but you also piss me off, so you two are a perfect match together. Thanks. Ikoa waves his hands and exits the cafe, leaving Ushijima dumbfounded. He asks for the bill, and feels like his eyes are about to pop out of their sockets as he checks how expensive a serve of pasta and shake was in the cafe. After he, reluctantly, paid for his meal, using almost all of his savings that he saved for the time being that he's staying away from home, temporarily, he then walked back to the dormitory. His mind was full of questions and realizations, but his stomach, however, was empty. Ushijima-san. Nice kill. Ushijima fist pumps a starstruck Goshiki, who was gaping at him in awe. I can't wait to be an ace like Ushijima-san. I'll be the #1 ace here in all of Japan. That's too ambitious, Goshiki. Now that's just really sad to listen to. Hey. Ushijima watches as Goshiki is teased by a couple of second and third years, a red blush on his cheeks as Shirabu says something incoherent that makes Goshiki hide inside his jersey. When Ushijima arrived back at their dormitory, he found a snoring Tendou sleeping on top of their bunk beds and semi-sleeping soundly on his part of the bed. Shirabu was reading a book on his desk at that time. He apologized for being late, then ate his food hungrily, surprising Shirabu at how hungry he was, but didn't say a word. The whole afternoon was spent with the two third years napping, Shirabu reading a manga he recently started reading during the break, and Ushijima looking at the crumpled tissue on his palms and lost in his thoughts. Later on, in the present, the team is currently in a practice match against each other to get ready for the spring tournament, although they are taking a break at that moment. One more set, and they are done for the day. With that, the three of them said a word to Ushijima about his sudden disappearance. Although Tendou was a bit weary of his return from somewhere, Ushijima was snapped out of his thoughts as Tendou waved a hand near his face, tilting his head to the side and giving him a teasing grin. Wakatoshi, you're a bit lost there, aren't you now? He shakes his head and looks at a beaming Tendou. All is well, Tendou. Are you sure? The look on your face before you left a few hours ago doesn't match your words or your face right now. Ah, really? Then I'll smile. He forced another smile that he thinks looks natural. Tendou chuckled nervously and patted his back in a reassuring manner. Let's make time for that one day, Wakatoshi. He pauses for a moment, then breathes out an airy laugh and squeezes his shoulder. A small smile was evident on his face, seeing as Tendou has a very contagious smile. Suddenly, he felt it. Thump, thump. He places his arms behind his back and feels the heartbeat on his wrist, the rhythm going faster after each thump. He felt his chest constrict briefly. You'll get a certain feeling when they are laughing, smiling genuinely. He sucks his teeth and looks away, trying to ignore that obvious sign that he was adamant on insisting that he wasn't seeing the signs. Wakatoshi? Are you alright? Your face is a bit sunburned. What? Are you sick? I'm not sick. He touches his cheeks that felt warm, which makes him double over in shock. This feeling was all too new to him. It's nothing. I don't know why, either. It was half the truth, but he's just a bit in denial. Whatever you say, Wakatoshi. He was about to reply until he heard their coach whistle, signaling the boys to go back into position and continue the remaining set before the day ended. A unison of yes was heard as they jogged towards their previous position. Tendou was his opponent in the practice match, so this was a great opportunity for him to do as Ikoa had said, to impress him. After all, it's totally platonic to do so, huh? As he was about to serve, he accidentally spiked it so hard that the ball hit the walls at the backs of the opposing team, with the ball bouncing back towards them, then inside their side of the court. Semi and the other third student stifled a laugh as the rest watched in awe, while the others were terrified. Tendou slowly whistles. Nice boomerang, Wakatoshi. That was impressive. Ushijima felt that newfound feeling all over again after hearing the words he didn't think he wanted to hear, especially from a specific middle blocker. Thump thump, thump. Ignoring that feeling once more, he watches Tendou look over in his direction and trails his eyes, on which the ball had made a home run, going back to their court, coughing slightly from containing his laughter. You'll feel a pang of jealousy in a specific circumstance. Jealousy? He had never felt that feeling in a long time, especially when it came to romance. As the game carried on, it was Semi's turn to serve. Luck was by his side when Yamagata was unable to receive his ball properly, almost making him double over from the heavy impact. Tendou, who was astonished, wrapped his arms around Semi's shoulders and ruffled his hair. His faint teases were heard from their side of the court. Shirabu rolled his eyes as Semi gave him a challenging smirk. My bad. I wasn't able to receive the ball in time. He glances at Ushijima, who was glaring sharply at Semi, making their libero squeak. Shirabu shrugged, not understanding, but also not caring. That was until it was Ushijima's turn to serve. Unknowingly, he spiked the ball hard enough to hit Semi, directly on his face. Oh, Ita, are you good? Shirabu immediately rushes towards Semi, who is holding his face and wincing. He caresses his cheeks and inspects his face. Where does it hurt? Let me see, Ita. Kinjiro, I think it needs a kiss so that it'll feel alright. Shirabu pinches the cheek where he was hit, making Semi screech from the pain. Ushijima rushes towards Semi and bowed apologetically, making Semi nervously waving his hands dismissively. My sincerest apologies, Semi. No, not at all. Everything's a-okay. Can you still play? Yes, of course. Ushijima nodded silently and watched Shirabu lecturing Semi, who was caressing his cheek, about being careful as the other members were snickering. Wakatoshi? What is up with you today? He glances at Tendou, who has a hint of worry and teasing plastered on his face. It's nothing. Right. It was definitely not nothing. As they carried on with the last remaining set, Ushijima's team won. Ushijima didn't like how he let a foreign emotion take over him as he accidentally inflicted pain on Semi, and he also didn't like how the constricting feeling on his chest has never wavered, not even for a second. Ushijima noticed that Goshiki and Tendou were over at the other end of the court, Goshiki animatedly talking to a smirking Tendou as he was changing his jersey. He was about to go to Tendou and talk to him until he felt a pair of hands on his shoulder. Ushijima, are you feeling alright? Yes, Rion. Why do you ask? Rion sat cross-legged beside Ushijima, observing their captain, who was staring at the sole of his shoes intently. Does this have to do with a certain redhead? Ushijima gave him a quick glance, then back to the ground. What makes you think that my lack of constraint and concentration was because of Tendou? Koanashi squats in front of Ushijima, a cheeky grin on his face. Hey, there's no point in sugarcoating. What's going on with you two? There's nothing going on with Tendou and I. Are you guys having a LQ? What? Lovers quarrel? No. So you're lovers? This just proves our theory. No. Oh, so you're not having a misunderstanding? No. Then what? Shut up, Teichi. You're being too much. Shirabu silently listens to their conversation as he drinks the remaining drops of water in his bottle. Semi crosses his arms as he tries not to grin, seeing Ushijima fidget unknowingly. Well, then, what do you think about Tendou? I think he's a good middle blocker. No outside of volleyball. Oh, he's a good friend to his friends. Semi pinches the bridge of his nose, making Koanashi and Shirabu snort. Rion chuckles. Let's try again. Let me ask you a simple question, Wakatoshi. Rion had a soft smile on his face as he handed him his water bottle that he had been looking around for. Do you find Tendou attractive? Suddenly, the memory of Tendou's hair falling down came into his mind. His heart constricted once more, and the thumping sound increased. He could barely hear a word they were saying due to how deafening the thumping sound was. Koanashi gasped, pointing at Ushijima's slightly tinted cheeks. So you're human after all. Yamagata came up from behind him and slapped the back of his neck, earning a grunt from him. Don't say that, it's rude. He paused. I kind of agree, though. Ushijima shook his head in hopes that the tint on his cheeks would disappear. He didn't like unfamiliarity at all. Semi, in a sing-song voice, started teasing Ushijima once again. Or, you think Tendou is pretty, huh? Ushijima glanced up at a dancing Semi and shook his head. No, Tendou isn't pretty. Semi's smile dropped, and so did the others. What do you mean? The image of Tendou during their FaceTime call was repeating over and over again in his head, and he was glancing up at them with a small smile. He was never pretty to begin with. Pretty isn't even the right term. He's. Suddenly, they heard the gym doors open with a loud bang, gaining the attention of everyone in the gym. Regardless, Ushijima's first priority was to find Tendou. He already knew what to say. They then spotted Goshiki running over to them, beads of sweat trickling down on the side of his face. He stops in front of them, panting exhaustedly. Guys. Tendou-san was crying and saying he didn't want to stay here anymore. What's going on? Everyone glanced at each other with worry. Ushijima sat up immediately and grabbed his belongings. Which direction? Goshiki screeched at how dangerous Ushijima's voice sounded. He shakily points in the direction Tendou ran, still trying to catch his breath. I tried making him stop since I heard that it'd be pouring soon, and he didn't bring an umbrella. What the hell is going on? Don't worry, I'll find him. The rest were about to follow him until he raised a hand, causing them to come to a sudden halt. I can find him on my own. They all hesitated at first but agreed regardless, after seeing Ushijima's face that showed that he wasn't leaving room for negotiations. Alright, if you insist. Take care, Wakatoshi. Ushijima didn't spare them another glance as he jogged outside the gym, in hopes of finding Tendou before it started to pour. The heavy rain was deafening. Ushijima, holding his umbrella, was jogging for almost half an hour. He searched everywhere on their campus, but there were no signs of Tendou. His phone kept vibrating in their group chat, asking for updates and worrying about their safety. Ushijima was so lost in his own thoughts that he started jogging without knowing where he was or where he was going. He needs to find Tendou. Fast. He's going to get sick from the cold breeze and heavy rain. Turning to a corner unknowingly, he stopped jogging and started to walk to the end of the narrow alley, feeling an all too familiar deja vu. It was the first time he'd ever stepped foot in the dark alley that only had one street light at the end of the alley, but it felt like he was coming back to a place he used to know. As he listens to the raindrops splattering harshly on his umbrella and the sounds of his damp volleyball shoes hitting the wet ground, he circles back to the question that he still can't exactly pinpoint. What is love, exactly? His breathing quickens as he picks up his pace, almost running as if he were being chased. What's so special about loving someone? He clenches his umbrella as the wind tries to harshly blow it away, a cuss leaving his mouth for the first time. What makes it so special about loving someone who reciprocates your love for them? He then came to a sudden halt as he saw a person crouching under a small shed as he reached the dead end, their bodies shivering as a shirt was draped on top of his head. He could hear a faint whimper. With the all too familiar feeling, he cautiously approached the person, his knee popping as he squatted in front of the crying boy, gaining his attention. The latter slowly removes the damp shirt to reveal himself, his eyes puffy and his lips quivering. Ushijima's lips parted slightly. His heart constricted once more, seeing his vulnerable state. It was Tendou all along. All this time that he had a dream with the same old scenario over and over again before he woke up was about Tendou after all. Without thinking, he places a hand on Tendou's back and brings him close, pulls him close, and gives him a tight hug, burying his face in Tendou's hair, smelling the peace of having him in his embrace. He could feel Tendou's body stiffen, but then he relaxed and returned his embrace, his loud cry in unison with the unexpected thunder. Ushijima clenches his jaw. He doesn't like seeing Tendou like this, and he doesn't even know why he's feeling this way. That bothers him a lot. Unfamiliarity bothers him a lot. After he felt that Tendou's ragged breathing had slowed down, he let go of the embrace and cupped a hand on Tendou's cheek, his eyes gazing softly at Tendou's puffy ones. Let's find shelter, you'll get sick. Tendou nods, sniffling as he looks anywhere but Ushijima. Ushijima then noticed that there were bruises on both of his kneecaps and smaller ones on his thighs. He thought of asking about what happened, but decided to ask later, when they are in a place that isn't open. Tendou opened his mouth to speak, but Ushijima interrupted him and carried him bridal style, the umbrella tucked under his arms. Wakatoshi, what are you doing? Put me down. I'm carrying you. I know that, but I'm asking why you're doing it. It looks like you hurt your knee. Tendou glances down at his wounded knee and sniffles again, wiping away a raindrop that landed on his cheek. I didn't twist a muscle, or break a bone. It's just a small scrape. I insist. Tendou. No, really, Waka. He was cut off when Ushijima started jogging back to where he came through, with Tendou gasping slightly. Hold the umbrella for me, please. Tendou, accepting the fact that Ushijima would not listen to him and put him down, sighed in defeat as he held the umbrella and made sure that they were both not wet from the pouring rain. As Ushijima jogged, none of them said a word to each other. It was only Ushijima's heavy breathing and footsteps, along with the rain, that filled the silence of the night. A couple of minutes later, Ushijima found an abandoned building and entered wearily, making sure that nothing dangerous was inside that could harm them, making sure the place was safe. He then gently places Tendou on a slightly damp piece of cardboard. He placed their bags that were slung on either side of his shoulders and sat beside Tendou. Their skin was almost touching at how close they were to each other. There was a moment of silence between the two as they watched the heavy rain splatter harshly against the cold pavement outside of the building. The rain gradually started to become softer with each passing minute. Tendou then finally broke the silence, not liking how unusual it was and how there was awkwardness between the two. He clears his throat as he fiddles with the damp shoelaces on his shoe. How did you find me? Ushijima stared at the pouring rain from outside the building and then at nothing in particular. I just somehow knew you were there. It felt like my body moved on its own, and then I found you. He breathes in, his voice low. It was hard to find you. Tendou shivers slightly and rubs his arms. Yeah, I intended it to be difficult. I wanted to be alone. Ushijima finally looks at a shivering Tendou and frowns. You were in the rain, soaking wet, for half an hour. Tendou breathed out a bitter chuckle. He stares at Ushijima with a cold look he never saw Tendou give him. Why do you care? That statement alone felt like his heart was squeezed tightly, making it hard for him to breathe. He didn't like his tone, but he also didn't like how he was shivering as he rubbed his arms harshly. Removing his slightly damp jacket, he draped it around a shivering Tendou and sighed. I always cared about your well-being, Tendou. Tendou gave him a silent thank you as he wrapped himself tighter with Ushijima's jacket, his face still cold as he stared at the ground. Don't bother lying, Ushijima. I know you're only saying that because you feel bad for me. He sucks in a deep breath, his eyes coldly staring at the ground. You're only saying that because I'm your roommate, your middle blocker, and the guy who always annoys you every morning. Ushijima felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. That's not the truth. And that's not how he feels about him. It pains him to see him in that state. He feels quite the opposite. What really is love? He turns his body to completely face Tendou, whose face had the all too unfamiliar look of stoicism written all over it. Tendou. Tendou looked at him straight in the eyes as tears started to fall. He quickly wipes away harshly and looks away. Don't look at me like that. Ushijima places his hand on top of Tendou's cold ones. Tendou, please, I don't understand. Stop looking at me with such fondness and softness in your eyes. It's killing me inside. He grinds his teeth as he glares at the ground, curling his fingers into a fist. Stop looking at me like I'm the only one you see. Because that's a lie that I don't want to convince myself as the truth. Tendou, his voice cracking, spoke in almost a whisper. You're making it difficult for me not to love you, Ushijima Wakatoshi. And you don't even realize how much I do. Ushijima was stunned as he stared at a now sobbing Tendou, not knowing what to do or what to feel. But there's one thing that he's sure of. Tendou then covers himself with the jacket Ushijima lent him and wraps it all over him, from his head to his chest. Just don't look at me right now. I'm a mess and in almost a whisper, he spoke with his lips quivering. Monster. Ushijima moved closer to Tendou, their bodies touching as he slowly lifted up the jacket that he hid all over his head and covered himself in. His face inches away from Tendou as he looked at Tendou with a soft look on his face. Ushijima cups his face and wipes a stray tear from his cheeks as he listens to the latter's soft whimpers. You're not a monster, Tendou. Tendou's hazy eyes stared at Ushijima's soft ones. You're ethereal. Tendou, stunned, slowly removed part of the jacket that covered them both and properly gave Ushijima a look, inspecting him all over his face with his gaze. Pardon? I think you're ethereal, Tendou. Ushijima stares ever so fondly at a still stunned Tendou and carries on. How could you say that when you just said to the team that I wasn't pretty? Ushijima chuckles lightly. Don't tell me you assumed, Tendou. You didn't even let me finish but you ran outside. It suddenly clicked. Was this the reason? Tendou's blush answered for him, making Ushijima grin widely. Figures. He then continues. I've been thinking about it for the past couple of hours since our call this morning, but I never knew the right word to use. Pretty is such an overused word for me to describe you, and I didn't feel like that was the word that best described how I feel about you. He tucks a strand of hair behind Tendou's ear, his finger lingering slightly against his face. Tendou closed his eyes. Then I saw you with your hair down for the first time, and it made me realize that you're not just a pretty boy, but also naturally handsome. He felt his heart thump loudly inside his chest for the millionth time in the past few hours. But then again, it's not even the right words either. You have this sort of light that you bring to everyone around you, this sort of impact on the people around you that makes them feel safe with you. He wipes a stray tear from the corner of Tendou's eyes. There isn't a right term that could describe how I feel about you, but ethereal is what I personally think that best describes you. He rubs his thumb against Tendou's moist cheeks. You puzzle me, but I don't mind spending my time trying to figure you out. He blows Tendou's face softly. His heart felt so full, but so light at the same time. He doesn't know what he's saying, but he knows that right here and then, he understood what he felt. Upon a sudden realization, Tendou pulled away from Ushijima's touch and removed the jacket draped around them and slowly backed off from him. Hey, don't say that. What would Ikoa think when he'll catch us like this? Ushijima gave him a bewildered look. Ikoa? What does Ikoa have to do with this? I don't know. Maybe he'll freak out seeing his boyfriend being all cozy with me and saying things like these? Ushijima blinks. Whose boyfriend? Tendou's face looked like he was both in pain and frustrated at the same time. He waves his hands frantically. You dummy. Who else could it be? Ushijima blinks again. Sudden wave of realization hit him. He parted his lips in surprise at the fact that Tendou thought Ikoa was his boyfriend. Without another thought, he threw his head back, laughing to his heart's content, clutching his stomach. Tendou jumped, and was equally as shocked as him and slowly crawled backwards, a bit terrified. Why are you laughing? You're scaring me. What's up with you? I feel like I'm in a nightmare and a sweet dream at the same time. It's uncanny. The rain stopped pouring, and was left with a few drops of rainwater hitting the puddles from outside. Suddenly, it wasn't as dark outside anymore. Ushijima stops laughing, wiping away a stray tear from the side of his eyes as he had a wide grin plastered on his face as he turns to face a pale-looking Tendou, who was staring at him, perplexed. How did you even come up with the absurd idea that Ikoa and I are in a relationship? Tendou tilts his head, sniffling. I heard the other first years in the changing room that apparently you went out on a date with him last lunchtime. Then they heard a conversation about love and relationship between you two. So, you assumed? Well, no. Yeah. I don't know. Ushijima bit his lower lip, trying not to grin once more. Tendou, you of all the people in our team know that Ikoa despises me with every fiber of his being, right? Sometimes hate turns into love, you never know. Tendou. Yeah? He's in a relationship with Iwaizumi. Oh. Tendou blushed as he looked at Ushijima. I didn't know that. I thought it would be quite obvious to you, Tendou. I thought you were updated to the latest gossip here in Japan. Not sure if I used the term right. Tendou chuckles quietly. Yeah, that's right. He cleared his throat. Then why were you with him, Wakatoshi? Why'd you suddenly leave before lunch? I needed his advice. About? Love. Tendou, who scooched closer, who loosened his tense composure after hearing Ushijima say that Ikoa is taken, tilts his head eagerly. Oh, really? Yeah. I wanted to understand more about love. Tendou, his voice almost a whisper, asked Ushijima a question he had been asking himself for quite some time now. Do you finally understand what love is, Wakatoshi? Ushijima went closer to Tendou, his hand cupping Tendou's face. Tendou leaning into his touch and sighing in content. The sight made Ushijima's heart feel like it would explode. Yeah, I guess you can say that I do, Satori. Tendou looked at him with glossy eyes once more as he bit his lower lip. Then what is love to you, Wakatoshi? Although Ushijima has no knowledge, no experience and no idea on the real definition of love, he knows that there really is no definite meaning whatsoever. It isn't easy to fall in love and understand how to love, but he finally understands the reason to love to be loved. Not knowing what to say, he places a finger below Tendou's chin and tilts his head to look up at him. He pulled him closer until he felt Tendou's breath hitch against his lips. Without warning, Tendou crashed his lips against Ushijima's, taking him aback and losing his balance. Tendou hovering on top of him. He snakes an arm around his waist as he deepens the kiss, pulling him closer. His heart thumped loudly against Tendou's, whom he could feel his heartbeat in sync with. At that very moment, he feels at peace. He feels safe in the arms of the person he has loved for quite a long time now. A realization that he had fallen in love with Tendou Satori was when the photo, that was set as Tendou's contact photo on his home, was taken. He remembers looking at their photo countless times when he got back home during that time. Oh, what a time. As he pulls away from their kiss, leaving the both of them breathless, he cups Tendou's face once more and gives a soft peck on Tendou's lips. I want to be by your side, Tendou. As long as you want me to. I want to be able to kiss you like this, hold you like this, and to be able to feel safe with you. Tendou leans into his touch and sighs in content once more, nuzzling his nose against Ushijima's soft hand. You make me feel safe with you, Satori. Tendou cups Ushijima's face with both of his palms and grins down at him. I feel safe with you too, Wakatoshi. As they stared into each other's eyes, a glint of moonlight shone through the dusty windows of the empty building, softly illuminating half of Tendou's face. Ushijima was, once again, breathless. How could someone be so ethereal underneath the moonlight? Without thinking, he blurted out 3 words he didn't think he would ever utter. I love you. Tendou was taken aback, but quickly composed himself and hugged him tight, burying his face on Ushijima's chest. I love you too, Wakatoshi. They laid there in each other's embrace, not daring to move. Neither of them wanted to let go or go home, even when the rain had stopped. It felt like it was them against the world. Although Ushijima doesn't necessarily know how to love, or how it'll go from here, but he knows that he will continue to love the red-haired boy on top of him as long as he lives. For now, he'll cherish this moment forever underneath the moonlight. Fin.
悩まずに生きることさ、俺たちのこの知識、はくなまたた